So this session, I think, is in many ways emblematic of the overarching structure that led to the lead commission, that led to the discussions, many of the discussions we're having here today. Because as Julius knows and as Secretary Duncan knows, this whole effort came because that's something that I think is fascinating and represents a lot of all the discussion we've had here today. The Secretary of Education got together with the chairman of the FCC, two bodies that don't always work together, and realized that they had a common goal in improving the lives of kids in this country and changing the education system in a very positive way on a massive scale. And that's really what led to much of the discussion we're having here today. And the great news is we're joined by really two of the most important players in this country on these issues. On my right and your left is FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel. So Jessica not only is an FCC Commissioner, far more importantly, she's a mom. She is also for years worked on Senator Jay Rockefeller's staff. So we heard Senator Rockefeller referred to several times today because he really was, in many ways, the pioneer and the voice. Bill Clinton disputes this, by the way, but one of them was the father of the E-rate. They're both very proud of it. And actually, Senator Rockefeller, and I hope many of you are coming to the Common Sense Media Awards tonight because we are honoring Senator Rockefeller for his many, many years of leadership around kids and education and media. And you really cut your teeth here in Washington as his key staffer on these issues. But it also gave Commissioner Rosenworcel a really good insight into the whole E-rate process we've been talking about and the broader connection between education and technology. On my left, your right, Jim Shelton is the key deputy secretary with Secretary Duncan, who has shepherded all the work we've been doing with the lead commission, all of the innovation technology stuff in the Department of Education over the past 4 years. Jim, too, has this claim to fame is the fact that he is also a doting parent. He's a former, I first met him when he was working at the Gates Foundation. So he is a longtime leader in the education space who now, again, along with Jessica and a few of the other people who have been here today, are the people who are really driving the broad shape of ed tech reform in this country. So I am between two pretty important players on this, and I'm going to jump right in. Here's the framework I want to talk about over this panel. The first is, when you look at education and technology policy, let's go back over the last 15, since the E-rate. Let's start with the E-rate, so 1996. What's worked and what hasn't, and why? That's one sort of an overview question that I want to get into. And then, what needs to be done now to get this right? To get this, now we have this opportunity. We talked to Jim Coulter, called it the Sputnik moment. We've been talking about it as a tipping point, all these things. What do we need to do to get this right this time and lay the foundation, if you will, for the next 25 years? And the third one is, what do each of you need people in this audience to do to get this done? Because the people in this audience have an enormous capacity to play different roles in this equation. So let me start, and I'll ask you first, Commissioner Rosenworcel. So looking back, because you were intimately involved with the development of and then the implementation of the E-rate, but a little more broadly, what's worked and what hasn't worked in terms of federal education technology policy over the past decade or decade and a half?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. Thank you for your very kind remarks. What worked and what hasn't worked? I think what worked is we got every school connected. We pioneered in the world making sure our schools were connected to the internet. Because in the aftermath of the Telecommunications Act of 1996, only 14% of schools were connected. Today, you've probably already heard, that number is north of 95%, which sounds impressive. But the truth is we have a lot of work to do because the challenge today is not connection, it's capacity. What we did in my office is we started studying our schools that get E-rate funds. And what we found is about half of them get support at 3 megabits or less. Now, 3 megabits or less is not enough for the most innovative teaching tools. It is not enough for high-definition streaming video. And it is not enough speed to prepare the next generation of science, technology, engineering, and math or STEM entrepreneurs. So I think one of the most important things we can do going forward is not just focus on connection, it's focus on capacity. And I'd like to see that we get 100 megabits to every school in the near term, and then over time, 1 gigabit to every school by the end of the decade.
Okay, sounds good. Jim, what's your sort of overall take on how you've watched these policies develop well, and where are the improvements?
So one way to answer your question is you can tell what worked by how many people claim credit for it. And so clearly E-rate
Everybody
is a
loves
huge
E-rate
success,
now, right?
right? And the fact that we did get every school in the country connected is a huge deal. The reality is that, and these will blend together in terms of what's worked well and what we need to do different is, we've seen examples, as we have throughout education reform, really examples of excellence pop up. People doing really innovative work, getting tremendous different outcomes. Some people developing new tools and resources that are changing the way kids learn and the way teachers teach. But what we didn't figure out how to do is to actually get that to happen at scale. And I think that the big question for all of us today is, what is it going to take to actually create the opportunity for every child in the country to have the best opportunity that some of our children have?
So you were nodding when Jim said that, Jessica. So why didn't it happen? Why didn't we get it right at scale? What do you think? You were there. You watched it happen.
I think we got right the idea of connection. We didn't get capacity right at scale. But I think we're at that inflection point where we no longer have to have big shrink-wrapped equipment shipped off to every school. We no longer have to tear down walls. We've got wireless routers. We've got new technology. We have devices that are declining in cost every day. Yeah. We are at that inflection point where we can do this at scale nationwide, and we can invite all sorts of innovators when it comes to technology and content to start producing new products for our schools across the country.
You agree?
Absolutely. This is not a question of like what was done wrong. We are at a fundamentally different place in time.
Yep.
All of the macro forces, if you will, are working with us. Jessica laid them out, the question laid them out perfectly. And I think you heard multiple people throughout the day talk about the need to think about this in terms of all the pieces that need to come together. And the good news is the macro forces are working for us. The bad news is that some of the same barriers, whether they're outdated procurement policies, whether they're outdated policies around seat time, whether they are the way that we actually think about textbooks, the way we constrain schools for trying new things, those things sometimes are still in place, and those will be the things that get in our way if we don't find a way to blow through them. The good news is, for all of us, is that most of that has nothing to do with federal policy. And has a lot to do, though, with leadership, and leadership at every level of the system. Funding the infrastructure, that's something that we should take on as a nation. Every time we've done that, it served us well. Every time we invested in a highway system or a rail system or R&D, our country has actually come out in a better place. It's allowed us, among the other things that Steve Case talked about this morning, to be one of the leading nations in the world, frankly, the leading nation in the world on a lot of fronts. But in this area, for whatever reason, we have allowed nostalgia to hold us back from driving the kind of innovation that's going to lead to transformative change. That's going to lead to very different outcomes. That's going to allow us to be successful in the future.
Okay, so let's go right to the heart of the matter, right? Let's talk about how you guys see the next 6 to 9 months working on this front. What do you think is critical to happen? And then I want to talk a little about what you think you need people in the audience to do about this, because this is in this audience today are a lot of people we need to actually play a leadership role. So how do you see the next 6 to 9 months rolling out? And do you think that's the proper time frame on the infrastructure issue, on the connect-ed and wiring of every classroom initiative?
You know, I think you bring up a really good point, which is speed. You know, it's a hoary cliche that the world is flat, but knowledge, jobs, and capital are going to flow to those places where we have better infrastructure in our schools. And the world is not waiting for us. If we pioneered connecting all of our schools, what we're finding out now is that other nations are ahead of us. They've got more schools connected to broadband. They're moving to tablets and e-readers faster. And so I think we have to move with dispatch at the FCC and make sure that we take the E-rate reform proposals that we first put out to the public in July and try to bring them to conclusion with an order in the first half of the next year.
So you'd say for the time frame you're looking at, so here we are, we're September 10th. We're talking about this should happen in the next 9 months.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, any things you want to add on that? I want to say the same thing, Jim. So how do you, any big picture, how do you see that rolling out in the next 9 months?
Well, in traditional Washington style, we started a rulemaking that asked somewhere between 100 and 1 million questions. Right. We are comprehensive.
Yes, Julius gave us earlier, Julius, we had a great panel where we went through some of the details. Someone asked question 43 or whatever.
No stone unturned, no footnote that's not itemized. What we need to do now is take that giant universe and identify a handful of goals and start organizing people around it, getting people to speak up, because we don't need to leave this to the usual Washington folks who comment in our process. Let's hear from teachers and school administrators on the front lines. Let's hear about how they're using technology in education and the gains they see in student achievement as a result.
Okay, Jim, you agree? I mean, how do you see, and how do you think that the DOE, Department of Ed, will work with the FCC over this next 6 to 9 month period to make some of this stuff happen?
So, I mean, the first thing is that the FCC, knows what it's doing, has got its notice out there. There are lots of people from the field that are going to put in ideas. I think one of the more important things that's been talked about today is making sure that the educational purpose of all of this stays in the forefront.
Yep.
And so what we'll try and do is to be that voice in the conversation that says, look, we can talk about it in terms of fits to the school and all that good stuff, but the reality is, what is the capability we need to deliver to a classroom so the learning experience is fundamentally different? And then ask the question of the many folks that are in the field, how do we best make that happen? And how do we make the best use of the taxpayers' resources to get that done? And how do we do it quickly enough that we don't continue to lag other countries? Yeah. And in fact, we can use this as an opportunity to leapfrog. So that's the first thing that has to happen. I want to go back to a point that actually Jean made earlier. In order for that to happen, the spirit with which this started, I think, needs to be maintained. And what I mean by that is that there are lots of ways for people to drag this process out through petty politics and self-interest. And as a country, I think everyone is ready for us to do something bigger and do something better. There is no better opportunity to do that. And so we need to take this as an opportunity to show what we can do as a country when we put our kids first.
So ballpark, I mean, because when Gene Sperling, you heard Gene speak earlier,
Yep.
which was, I thought one of the most important things today was Gene coming in here and talking about his own personal, even though he is from Michigan, Amy, and a Tiger fan. He had that really impassioned statement about what it meant to him, talking about in the context of his mom as a teacher, and about the fact that this has to be messaged to the public about educational outcomes, not about just wiring, right?
Absolutely.
What do you see the Department of Ed doing over the next, say, 6 months to really drive that home? Because I agree, Arne Duncan's been a very effective and public Secretary of Education, as of you. What do you guys see evolving over the next 6 months? And again, I'm tying it into what people in this room ought to be anticipating and getting involved in.
So I think there are 3 really important things. I know the lead report was handed out. Some of them are reflected in there. One, sometimes I like to say, some people can't imagine it until they can see it.
Yep.
And so we need to get those examples out there for people so that they really understand what the real practical benefit is to their child. The second is that we need to actually go directly to the folks who may doubt that this is for their kids for some reason. And I want to come back to this point about excellence and equity and the opportunity we have to create the best learning environments that any of our kids have ever had the opportunity to experience, and to do it in a way that addresses many of the equity issues that have been pervasive for decades and decades and decades. Whether it's rural isolation or economic isolation, this is their opportunity to break that down. And you heard John talk about,
Correct.
us needing to get a better sense of what it is that our kids are actually capable of, because we have absolutely no idea. I mean, think about what he said, 54th percentile to 98th percentile in a year. It sounds too good to be true. Wouldn't it be great to find out?
Okay, so as you see this rolling out, right? So you just talked about the voices of educators, the voices of teachers, the voices of parents. How do you see that happening, Jessica? I mean, how do you see that process happening over the next 6 months in a way that will actually impact the FCC process?
Well, I hope that our public record includes a lot of input from folks like that. I think it's really important, like I said before, that we don't just leave this to the usual crew of people in Washington. We know how that goes.
We do.
I think that it's important that we hear from people who are using this in the classroom, who can demonstrate in a real way the value they get from having enhanced technology in their teaching.
So let me pick up on that. So we heard today, I mean, every time we get up and do something with the lead commission, Jim Coulter is frequently the key speaker, and he is emblematic, I thought Steve Case was earlier today, and some of our other panelists, of business leaders who said, look, this is so obviously in our economic self-interest, we have to drive that point home. Do you see, how important do you think in this process, the business community, including the inside the Beltway business community, which is here in large, which is going to be here as a big player, how do you see that evolving in sort of this education tech policy 2.0?
Absolutely. I think we are all invested in the next generation being college and career ready, making sure they have digital age skills, and digital literacy is a part of that. More than that, I think there are going to be opportunities that if we bring all of our schools up to having really high-speed broadband, and we do it at scale, we are going to send a signal to the marketplace for content creators, for device manufacturers. We are going to create opportunities for them to develop new tools and new ideas and new content for schools across the country. So I see that as a business opportunity that we have to get people excited about.
Well, I will just say, in the work we've been doing at the Lead Commission, when President Obama went to Mooresville, right after that, the discussions we had with the business guys changed, because they actually started to say, okay, this is really going to happen. And they were waiting for the, and Jim, I have a question for you. So you've been in government now for 4 years and obviously have worked on the fringes thereof plenty before that. How do you see getting over, I mean, I live in the Bay Area, so you just look at Washington from the Bay Area and you just think dysfunctionality. You do, very simply, you do. And this is something that everybody here today, no matter what their political persuasion, we've had people with all different points of view on this, saying this is a no-brainer in terms of the country. How do you see us overcoming this in the next 6 to 9 months? The political partisanship that seems, at least from the distance I live at, to grip so much of what happens in this town. How do you see that being overcome in this case? And what do people in this room need to do about that?
So I think the first thing is obvious, which is we started off in a great place. I think we're still in a good place. I think we just need to keep from slipping into the mire that everything somehow seems to find itself. I mean, the fact that you've got Tom Luna here, who has been a great advocate for this work and is a real pioneer in how to leverage technology in this in the state. You got John Bailey in the back, who works with Governor Jeb Bush. I mean, there are people throughout this room who are working on both sides of the aisle because they recognize how important this is. That is the kind of coalition that needs to come together to keep moving forward this work. The second thing is that that we have many tools available to us to try and get this work done. And it is going to require, we keep talking about the infrastructure piece, but it actually requires the other pieces to come together as well. And I think the business community does recognize the importance of this work, and they are willing to jump in and help to make sure that the devices are there. I see colleagues from the publishing sector that are here thinking about how do I begin to transition my business to be able to recognize I make a ton of cash today on my textbooks, transition to this new world and be successful and actually move into the business that I want to be in, which is actually changing the lives of kids while I do my day-to-day work. Nobody wants to be the company that gets held up as the people that are holding us back to the old world every time. And so I think that if people can keep clear the focus on the kids, like we said earlier, keep the students right in front of us, we can fight off. There's plenty of other stuff that the folks who really enjoy a good fight can fight about. Like there's no shortage of that. And we can just drive this through because it's so clear how good it is for our kids and for the country. And then just the last thing on this economic piece, education worldwide is a $5 to $6 trillion marketplace. Many of the countries that need most to accelerate their education cannot rebuild the infrastructure that we have today. They can't hire the teachers fast enough. They can't build the schools fast enough. They are going to find a different way. Some country is going to lead in providing that support and service to them and helping them figure out how to educate the masses of their populations. It would be nice if it was us.
Jessica, and then I'm going to ask you each a final question. What would you say in terms of what the question I just asked Jim about getting beyond sort of the partisan divide that we all are, I'm sure everybody in this room is really sick of too. Seriously, on an issue that is so obviously of value to every kid, and including your own and my own and Jim's own, you know, moving forward. How do you see that? How do you see that happening? And then I'm going to ask the last question to both of you. What do you want people in the audience to do?
Sure.
Well, I think Jim just said it really perfectly. Somebody is going to lead on this. We can let other nations lead the way. Technology is changing at a blistering pace. I think we should seize this, and I think that we can do it right here at home. We can leave this to chance, or we can make a choice to try to organize all of our activities now, make sure that schools have connectivity, that there are new devices out there, that teachers have training. And if we make that choice, I think we can be the ones who lead.
Okay, powerful, that powerful argument. So Jim, you first, and then let's let Commissioner Rosenworcel have the last word on this. Okay, what do you want the people in the room to do?
Let your voices be heard. there are both with the FCC process. There's an incredibly informed set of folks here in this room. Make sure that we actually that they understand what it is that's important to get about E-rate today, what needs to happen to make it to make it successful in the future, and then all of the other folks that have an influence on the FCC process, they need to understand how important this is to all of us. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we talk about the ecosystem play. Many of you are involved in different parts of the ecosystem, whether it's about providing devices, whether it's about providing training to teachers, whether it's about creating the next generation of content and interactive digital learning experiences for kids. We need there to be no doubt for any superintendent, any state superintendent, any teacher, any principal, that when they decide to make this transition, that great stuff is going to be there waiting for them. It has been totally rational for teachers not to spend a lot of time figuring out how to use technology when there were 3 to 4 computers sitting in the back of the classroom if they were lucky, one of which was guaranteed not to work, and it disrupted your entire classroom trying to figure out how to get the rotation cycle right. The world we're talking about will allow us to make it totally rational to make the transition if we deliver. So deliver.
So everybody in the room's got to deliver. What would be your call to the troops out here?
More of the same. Be noisy. Help us make it happen, like others, like Jim Coulter have said. This is our Sputnik moment. We can do some really great things. We can call it Connect Ed. We can call it E-rate 2.0, but I think we just have to make it happen.
And frame it around the kids.
Absolutely.
And frame it around kids in education. So I think that we're going to wrap up the panel. The one thing is, Jonathan or Jeff, do you guys have a copy of the LEAD report that just came out? Are you guys going to hand it out? Is that the plan? This is a very summary. We'll pass it out maybe while we're doing the next. It's a very short summary of our 5 recommendations. And I would just want to say again, the way I started the panel, we wouldn't be here today if actually first Julius and Arnie got together and said, why isn't the FCC working with the Department of Education to transform education in the country? These are the 2 folks who in many ways were spearheading that for us. So thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you very much, Jim, for coming today. Thank you guys.